My name is Philip Backus, and welcome to my PowerPoint presentation entitled Interpersonal Education: How Community-Based Learning Helps Children Excel. In this presentation, I will discuss how interpersonal communication plays a critical role amongst teachers and their students, as well as students and their peers. Before I go into my thesis, I'm going to provide a little bit of background on myself, as well as the class that I was able to observe. To start off, I'm a first-year graduate student at Fairfield University. Prior to this field experiment, I haven't really had that much exposure on observing any type of classroom. However, I have been coaching ice hockey for the past 4 years and have had some camp counseling experience, so I do have experience when it comes to educating students in one way or another, mine being hockey, this one being education. Um, as far as how I thought this was all going to go, I was very nervous because again, this is my first time observing a classroom, being in a classroom during school hours, and just I didn't know what to expect. And at the end of this assignment, I'm proud to say that not only did I feel comfortable in a classroom setting in watching the teacher and how he went about his class, this was an eye opener for me because it was a totally different type of teaching method that I've ever seen as far as elementary school education goes. So to start off about the class that I observed, I was fortunate enough to observe a fifth grade class at Columbus Magnet Elementary School in Norwalk, Connecticut. A little details about the professor or the teacher himself. He is a white male in his mid-20s, so right off the bat, I personally was able to relate being a white male in his mid 20s, late 20s, I should say, or shouldn't say. But anyways, um, it was easy to relate, and after talking to him and finding out how passionate he was about the education of his students, and as well as all of the effort that he puts into creating these lesson plans and how he goes about taking lessons that would more or less be quote unquote dry and boring and turning them into something that the kids themselves would enjoy. About the class themselves, I did a little bit of a demographic, so I found out that this was a very male-dominated classroom, about 14 guys and 7 females. White students making up the majority, Latin Americans having 6 students, 4 African American students, and 1 Muslim student. So, as far as diversity culturally, this is a very culturally diverse class, and as far as educational differences, at the end of my observations, I learned that they also uh, differed as well. As far as the classroom itself, very colorful classroom. A lot of the stuff on the walls was created by the students themselves. The teacher put up a few of his favorite sports teams. Notice the Rangers flag in the corner of this picture here. Let's go Rangers. I'm a Rangers fan. The books there are a bunch of the books that the kids like to read, a lot of them being poetry books. I, being a poetry fan myself, huge fan. Each table that the students sit at comes with they each have their own Chromebooks, which is a smart book. So each student interacts with each other on the smart books as well as with the teacher. They get their lessons from there. They do their work there. It was very interesting to see how far technology goes. But even with the technology in the classroom, the teacher still made it very important to emphasize how important it was, at least to me, that interpersonal communication play in his classroom. Each table had about 4 chairs, so there were 4 students per class. If you notice on that table there's an orange ball. One of the students is, I believe, on the spectrum, so to to counter, I guess he can't sit still. So what the teacher did was he gives him this ball when he feels a little antsy, so he kind of lets it all out by throwing it up and down. The class is used to it, so it didn't really show too much of a distraction as far as while he was teaching. But it was nice to see that the teacher was able to notice that the student himself got antsy and was able to figure out a way to not only control the student himself, but to also keep the class on task. All right, so now that you know a little bit about the class, let's go into the thesis. The thesis that I'm providing to you today is by having a community-based atmosphere in the classroom, it creates a sense of belonging, resulting in increased work, problem solving, and higher self-esteem. The information that I'm going to be providing to you based on my observations really help give this thesis some oomph, a little bit of, it really helps bring to life how important it is that a community-based atmosphere be in the classroom. At least based on this observation and how I myself feel that I'm going to be structuring my classroom when given the opportunity. The picture on my right here is just a little example of what the students created. They had a project on the Revolutionary War, and each of them took turns on writing causes and effects of the Revolutionary War. A lot, and this, along with a lot of the work in general around the classroom, was created by the students. So it's a very student-dominated classroom. And when I say dominated, I mean that in the sense of they lead discussions, they engage in conversations. The teacher's primary role was to just interject in certain parts of the class, and when it got off track or if the students weren't sure. But more or less what I observed was he gave them a subject or a topic. The students researched it on their smart books. If it was an individual assignment, they kept to themselves. But most of the work that they were given was group work. So after they did a little bit of research on their smart books, they then gathered their information, shared it with their tables, and then took turns sharing it amongst each other in class. So that's my thesis. Now let's hop into some personal observations. All right, so this picture here was actually my view of the class. This is where I sat during my days of observation. A few of the things that I personally observed were the teacher. As I've seen teachers in the past, they were, when you see the teacher walk in, you're quiet. Everything was very serious. It was kind of a very tense feeling in the classroom. But from every day that I sat in this class, it didn't feel like there was any kind of tension at all. If anything, it was a very relaxed setting. The teacher would play some light classical music so as to not have total silence in the classroom, as well as to keep the students calm, I guess you can say, because it was very soothing. I almost fell asleep. But anyways, just kidding. Um, a lot of the class was based on class discussions. The students were given out worksheets and papers, but they were usually worked on after the class had discussed something relating to the topic in which they were going to be working on, or after the teacher had played a video or a song or whatever the case may be. Another thing that I noticed was that there, although there were times where certain students didn't really necessarily seem to be as engaged as the rest of the class, when it came time to want to be engaged, the rest of the class encouraged them. So the teacher didn't have to go out of their way to say, "Hey, what are you doing?" or, what's wrong? Why aren't you paying attention? So on and so forth. The students themselves would pretty much watch over each other, and when they saw somebody not really into it or, kind of down or confused, they would gather amongst each other and rally around each other. So that in itself to me was a huge role. And the whole community-based atmosphere in the classroom and boosting self-esteem. So even if for a moment a student may have seemed a little down or out of place in the class, the students themselves picked up on it. And in very, very, very seldom cases did the teacher ever have to interject and personally go up to a student and ask what's wrong. Um, That being said, on my first day of observations, unfortunately, the class decided to act up in the lunchroom. Someone was throwing around a football when they weren't supposed to. And instead of yelling at the whole class and reprimanding the whole class, the teacher had the class sit down and in a very calm demeanor told the students that he wasn't mad, he was a little upset, and if the student who was responsible for throwing the football came forward, only they would be given a little extra work on top of the work that the rest of the class would be given. But if they didn't come forward, the whole class would have to pay the consequences and they would all get extra work. So, without raising his voice and without the students getting upset with each other, they kind of all looked around and the student who was responsible eventually came forward. It was kind of sad to see, tears in his eyes. But the teacher respected the fact that he was mature enough to come forward and be responsible for his actions and didn't give him that much more work than the rest of the class, but enough to show the student that what they did was wrong in that setting and the punishment that he was given fit what the action that had taken place in the lunchroom. So just to see how the teacher reacted in a position where I've known teachers to explode or yell and have the whole class be responsible, the fact that he gave the class the ability to be responsible and to show that maturity, it spoke volumes because it showed to me that the teacher has a good relation with all of his students to the point where he doesn't need to yell and that they can come together and resolve a problem without any kind of, anger or, you know, aggression. One thing that I found, this was an example of where the community-based atmosphere in the classroom comes into play. This was an actual assignment sheet that was given to the class after the class had watched a few music videos. Music videos, okay, so you're thinking they just kind of went on YouTube for a little bit. No. What the teacher did was he asked the class, what are a few songs that you guys like? And one of them was, I think, Party in the USA by Miley Cyrus. And he would play the song. And then after he played the song, he'd bring up the lyrics. And one by one, he would go down the line and pick out lines. And if one was a metaphor, he would ask, is this a metaphor or a simile? And this was all, I forgot to mention, this was all prior to the teacher giving the definition of metaphor and simile. So to back it up a little bit, the teacher just introduced the topic by giving the definition of metaphors and similes. The teacher then played the music video of Miley Cyrus' Party in the USA. After playing the video for a brief period of time, he took out the lyrics from the portion of video played and asked the students to see if they saw any metaphors or similes. At first, a few of the students, or a good amount of the students, I should say, were a little confused, but then the teacher played another song. This one coming from his playlist. I don't think the students even knew what it was. It was Every Rose Has Its Thorn, I believe by Guns N' Roses. Axl Rose? Yeah, Guns N' Roses. So they went through there, and the title itself, Every Rose Has Its Thorn. It's poetic, but it may also come as a metaphor. I don't think it is. But again, after the second song, the kids started to get more of a hang of noticing, which ones were metaphors and which ones were similes. After watching the two videos and dissecting the lyrics, the students were then given this sheet. And the students were told, to work in groups of four, so pretty much each table was a group. go through the list and discuss amongst each other which ones were similes and which ones were metaphors. And while I walked around the class and kind of heard a little bit of the discussions that the students were having, and oh, this kind of reminds me of, that part in the song. That was a metaphor. Oh, no, 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 that's a simile because in this song it was that. So to see how some students viewed the lyrics and how they viewed them as metaphors and similes, as opposed to the way that they were able to bounce off the information off of each other, and the teacher would walk around and make sure that they were all on the same page. And the key of this was, as a group, when they discuss, when they're verbally speaking to each other, making face-to-face contact with each other, as well as individually working on this assignment as well. They gather information in more ways than just reading this sheet after knowing the definitions and then writing whether or not they know the answer. So that's this assignment in itself played a role in community-based learning because the teacher had a good enough relationship with the students to where he was able to have them pick out a song that they like, relate it to the topic, and then have the students better understand what exactly it was that they were learning. This actually also came from an example given in Moreno where Mr. Jensen assumed that his students weren't really motivated enough to read, but what he did know that the class they liked rap music. He didn't himself know too much about rap music, but he was able to incorporate the rap music into his lesson, which then not only got the kids more engaged to want to read, but also helped increase the scores in their tests as well. This next assignment that I have here is on the American Revolution. Before I go into that, though, I wanted to point out that something interesting. I wasn't able to get a picture of it. Don't ask me why. I totally forgot. I spaced out. But the students had a contract that was written by the teacher but signed by all the students. In the contract itself, it had certain rules that the whole class had to abide by, and if they didn't, then there would be consequences such as, call home or extra homework, given the severity of which rule they broke. Few of the rules that were listed were being respectful to one another, listening while others are speaking, respect each other's opinions, be courteous to one another, and I felt that that gave each student a sense of belonging because knowing that the whole class signed it, that they were on the same page. They were all after the same goal. So it built a oneness in the class. So if all of them, it's all for one and one for all. They all have each other's back. They all signed the contract. So they're all in it to win it, as they should say. They learn together, they earn together, as Mr. Singeri, the teacher, would say. Um, the picture here, picture of an American Revolution project that the class was given. Now, I remember in elementary school we had a few projects like dioramas and stuff. Anything that was hands-on, at least to me, I felt more engaged as opposed to, here, write a 3-page paper on dinosaurs or a 2-page paper on sharks. Go to Britannica and read a bunch of encyclopedias and to me, I'll speak for myself when I say, I love to read, but as far as for a project, it felt very tedious and it felt like a lot of work. I'm not going to beat around the bush. But what Mr. Singeri, the teacher of this class, was able to do was that he created a project in which the students had to create a newscast. So what they did was each class had a group, or each group was responsible for creating a newscast relating to a certain time or incident that had happened during the Revolutionary War. Um, it was really funny. The kids, they all got Um, they got to record on their Chromebooks. Some of them did it at home. They were able to use props. But the thing that was interesting to see was how they really wanted to incorporate the details into what happened in the American Revolutionary War into their project. So they really had to study so that when they presented, they quote unquote didn't sound stupid. That's a fifth grader, not me. Okay. But anyways, they were it, projects like this where you take a topic such as the American Revolutionary War and bring it to life, so to say, and modernize it and give it its own type of like your own little taste to it. It really got the students more engaged in wanting to participate in this. They all wanted to be like Ron Burgundy. I'm sure they don't know who Ron Burgundy is, but if they did, I'm sure they would want to be like Ron Burgundy. And how this how this pertains to the thesis is, again, they were in groups. They had high self-esteem because they were all encouraging each other. They all wanted to play certain characters. They wanted to really, really show the teacher that they really understood and show each other, and not only that, but they showed themselves how much they really understood about this topic. The rubric here, they had two rubrics. One of them was for themselves, and one of them was for the group. So not only did they know that they had individual responsibilities, but they also had to contribute to the group as well. So that was very beneficial because it gave the students responsibility, but not an overwhelming responsibilities to where they felt stressed out. They knew what they had to do, they were focused, they were engaged, and I mean, I wasn't a student, but if I wish I could have hopped in the news, done the weather or sports or something. A lot of my thesis related to what Moreno spoke about in cooperative learning. Um, these are just a few of the things from Moreno that I was able to pull out that really I read this in Moreno, and a lot of it pertained to the class that I was observing. Students in cooperative learning groups are more likely to get along with peers from a different race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status than students in control groups. This really brings together a lot of what I was observing. I like I said, as far as the demographics, gender, culturally, it was very diverse. And as diverse as it was, I didn't really get a sense of any type of difference in students, so to say. And I mean that in the sense of they all seem to unite as one. And each they all respected each other to the point where all of their differences didn't really play part in the overall objective, which was to be successful in the classroom. And a lot of the things that I noted here about, positive interdependence, face-to-face interaction, which a lot of kids really don't get because they all have their faces in their iPads or iPhones. So to see a whole class, even with the technology in the classroom, still having face-to-face interactions and interpersonal communication be the key role in what drives the class was very, very, it was very reassuring to me, especially being somebody who likes to talk and finding the importance in interpersonal communication, and to see it in an elementary school setting and the structure that the teacher had it in, it really nothing but positive, nothing but positive. A few of the quotes, these quotes here I pulled from the readings that we were given, and these quotes in particular I found related a lot towards my class. The first one from Banks here, discussing about how minority students of backgrounds categorized as caste-like rise to the occasion when multicultural education is, a way to change the business as usual of schools. This pretty much, again, harming back on the oneness. So I guess I can say every culture and every background was accepted and respected. There wasn't really any kind there wasn't any sense of difference. I mean, everybody had their differences, but everybody also respected their differences because again, they all had the common goal of succeeding. The second quote here from Blantone about additive Americanization, talking about how authorities choose not to discard the child's ethnicity, culture, or language. This is spot on to the teacher who I observed because the the teacher he didn't he really he built a relationship with his students to the point where I guess I was always told there's a way you speak at work and then there's a way you speak with your friends. Well, in this instance, how he speaks at work is somewhat how he would speak to his friends. Instead of his friends, it would be his class because he's built such a personal relationship with his class that he's also crafted a way of speaking and relaying the information to his class so that so that they respond the best to it. As far as Dr. Joy DeGruy's preschool bias, I really didn't see any indicators about the teacher, you know, or he didn't really show any of his own personal biases or acted out on his biases. He was very engaging with every student, uh, almost every single day, or I should say every day, not every, almost every day. Every day he was engaged with every single student, and I personally didn't think that any student felt or seemed left out, whether it was but race, gender, or culture. The last quote here from Ladson and Billings talking about how the teachers who are most effective in communicating with the students used an interactional style, the author's term culturally congruent, basically talking about how the teachers alter in their speech patterns, communication styles. So this more or less, I guess, I mean, it hurts me to even say like how the kids are like, that was lit, or like that was sick. So the teacher would use, how they speak and incorporate that into his how he taught. So like, American Revolutionary War was lit. I, I just feel stupid even saying that. But this to me, that quote, all these quotes here stood out to me because they all stood out in in the sense of these really spoke to me as to what I observed. That when you create a community-based atmosphere, knowing that every student is different, when you build that in your classroom, the students hop on board. Uh, the contract, they all pretty much came up with their goal. They came up with the list of things that they wanted to focus on and what they needed to do, and they all were on board for it. And all these here, pretty much all these quotes here to me say, you know, if you want to change how, you know, the education system is in America, you could. Just don't go as usual. Be a little different. So instead of, handing out worksheets and having kids take notes, get more engaged because once they see how engaged you get, as much as I saw this teacher get with his class, they'll in turn want to get more engaged and motivate each other to be engaged as well. So, all that being said, in conclusion here, I pretty much determined that, you know, when the classroom structure is based on the cooperating learning method, it's a really successful atmosphere. The students really grab a hold of it, and the teacher I commend the teacher very much on how he set up his classroom, and I wish the best for those students, and I thank him for giving me the opportunity to observe his class. It was a great first experience, and I want to thank you all for taking the time to watch this presentation, and I hope that you learned a lot. My name is Philip Backus, and I hope you enjoy it. And these are my sources. Thank you, and have a good day.